Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Sagrona, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
Sagrona Teema, I'm Jay Krebs.
All right, season 2 of Andor is here, and on this episode of Podcast Stardust, we are talking about the first 3 episodes. Jay, you want to go ahead and give everyone our social media contacts before we get started?
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram, very easily found at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. This will be our full spoiler discussion of episodes 1 through 3 of season 2 of Andor. They are titled 1 Year Later, Sagrona Teema, and Harvest. So, Jay, did you get your rewatch of Andor done before season 2? Of rewatch of season 1 done before season 2 debuted?
Almost.
Yeah.
But I will admit I did rely on Disney Plus. There is a season 1 recap
Oh, there you go.
available. And so I watched that as well. And I mean, I remembered pretty much everything anyways, but it was nice to be able to see that. But did you get to rewatch the whole thing?
Yeah, I finished it just in time. I think I finished it
Nice.
right before Celebration Japan started. So,
Great.
yeah, I got it in. And then uh, I had looked up some stuff from one of the episodes of Ahsoka to complement the discussion you and I had, and I went right into that before. So I was continued watching with that. So almost done with the rewatch of Ahsoka as well, but we'll see what happens there.
Good for
So what did you think of these first 3 episodes of season 2 overall?
Okay, so first of all, I've been so stinking excited to be able to get into this again, and it didn't disappoint. I mean, there were some things that I think were, for me personally, I was a little bit more attracted to in the storyline than others, and there was a couple of things that I had to go back and either rewind just a little bit, or I did end up putting the closed captions on. I'm not gonna lie, because there were some accents or some things that were being said and some things that were overlapping over other people, and I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. But I'm telling you what, this really, the stakes are so high and you can just feel it. And it's just as gritty as we thought it was going to be. It's just as significant in terms of, what's at stake for everyone involved, and, just getting to see all the volatility of what's happening with all of these different groups of people as they're, overlapping with the different storylines and everything is just so good. So good. So I'm so into it so far. But what about you?
Oh, I enjoyed it immensely. It started an hour earlier for me than it did for you, because I'm in Central Time Zone, but it started at 8, and I was tired when it started, but I made myself stay awake and watch all 3 episodes in the one sitting, and I'm glad I did. I had so much
Good for
fun
you.
watching that. You know, they probably didn't know when they filmed this that they were going to release 3 episodes at a time. But if they did, I wish they just would have edited it all together into like a movie of the week type of a format.
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
you had between all 3 of these episodes something like 2.5 hours of,
Hmm.
and so it might as well have just been a movie if you're going to release them all at once like this. And it kind of felt like a movie there. It would have been edited a little bit differently, I suspect, if they had done that. But that being said, minor gripe, just putting that out there. But it was really cool to pick up on this story after all of the origins and backstory we got from season 1, just to see how these
Yes.
characters developed in that year, and none more greater than Cassian did.
Hmm.
So anyways, let's go ahead and get into that. We've got a lot of different stuff going on, and rather than take these on as a episode by episode, I think we're going to kind of follow characters and plotline by plotline here as we get through everything. Let's start with the man himself on this. We start with 1 year later, which is the first episode, and it picks up with Cassian on the planet of Sinir at the Sinir test facility. I smiled when I saw that. We know that
Yes.
Sinir, put together a lot of the components that's in the TIE fighter, and it was so huge in Legends.
Yep.
But to get to see it so deliberately name dropped here was really, really cool.
It really was. I know I said it out loud, and I know, like, my husband probably was like, "What?" But
Yeah.
but for us, if you know, kind of thing.
Right. So Cassian is in disguise as an Imperial test pilot, and he's getting ready to steal the experimental TIE Avenger, and he's got inside help from this technician named Naya, and she is beyond nervous. But
Yeah,
he
sweet
gives
thing.
her this great pep talk. We get great lines in the show, like right off the bat. And he,
Mhm.
he tells you the Empire cannot win. You never feel right unless you're doing what you can to stop them. You're coming home to yourself. And it's exactly what she needed to hear on that. And I also kind of love the whole thing where, she's waiting on her manager to leave and she shows up and then, they're just like, he's cute.
Yeah.
So, but then he steals the Avenger on that. And so we get this really great action scene to kick things off. In a way, it kind of reminded me of a James Bond movie where you start off with the action scene, which may or may not pretend like everything else is going to happen after that.
Yep.
But they didn't waste any time giving us what we wanted.
Oh, it's so true. And, I have to say also that as much as we love Star Wars just across the board, the tone of the show is so much more of like a deeper adult
Uh-huh.
themed type of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
And, even with, the language that's said, and even when Cassian, like, runs into the wall the first time and he says an explicative,
Mhm.
that surprised me. But just some of the conversations that were being had and some of the nuances and innuendos and things that were being thrown around. I mean, it was just kind of like one of those things where I was like, wow, this is really, really deep. I mean, just like I said, the adult nature of it. But I did really appreciate how Cassian was talking to Naya, and she was such a sweet, sweet thing. Like, she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to look at you. I swear I didn't see anything." And finally, he says, "Look at me."
Yeah.
Like he wanted her to be able to feel like she was connecting and not just doing this for, like she needed to hear that you're coming home to yourself. I just thought that was so great.
Well, and I can't remember the exact line, but he's like, "You're risking everything. You can look at me."
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
honoring the risk and the sacrifice that she's making
Right.
there. And so
Right.
the other thing that's like Cassian is so different at the beginning of the season where compared to where he was at the beginning of season 1.
Mhm.
Because, back then, yeah, he was looking for his long lost sister, but he kind of had this reputation of being a ladies' man and, being uh, done a lot of odd jobs. He owed a whole bunch of people type of money. And so he didn't like take on a whole lot of responsibility. But here he's developed into this capable operative who has got some leadership skills to him.
Right, right. And I think, just with everything that happened on Narkina 5 and then with Luthen and just his focus and his everything just shifted for him. And you could see where he was kind of a lost soul before, just a little bit. And
Mhm.
he's locked in now.
Right. So he steals the TIE Avenger, great action sequence. He gets pursued. Those TIE fighters that were following him looked like the ones that the Inquisitors were using in Rebels. Did you notice that?
I was trying to figure out I couldn't see them the greatest, and,
Uh-huh.
it was one of those things where, like, the screen was a little darker, but I'm glad that you said that because I
Yeah.
did not.
Because the time should about match up, I think, on that as well. But anyway,
Mm, mhm,
but
okay.
that he mainly runs for them, and then he shoots his little rockets at that overhang that he flies under, and the debris smashes the TIE fighters. That was pretty cool. But he
Oh,
ends
yeah.
up what turns out to be Yavin 4, only we don't know it at the time. And that's in episode 2, when he finally escapes from these people, and we see the Masasi temples in the background. But
Mhm.
he runs into what we come to find out is the Maya-Pei brigade. And these are rebels who kind of got stranded on Yavin 4. They don't exactly have a whole lot of competence to them. They've lost their pilot and their leader, but they came across Cassian's contact, Porco, I thought that was going to be Porkins when I heard
Right?
that the first time.
I heard same, yep.
But they killed him because apparently they didn't get along with him. And they're not bright. They're just simply not bright people. They decide that Cassian has to be an Imperial TIE fighter because he's wearing the costume, despite his protestations that this is a prototype that I stole, and they don't know what to do with him, and they can't figure out how to fly a TIE fighter here. So he just kind of finds himself in this really bad situation, but he uses his superior maturity, tactics, cunning, and guile to ultimately get away from these people.
Right, right. Yeah, and this was the part of it that I will say, I don't know, I felt like it was unnecessarily drug out
Mm,
with the way that they portrayed the Maya-Pei brigade. But one thing that it did do well was that it really highlighted how fragmented the
yes.
rebellion is at this point, that there's so many underground factions and, groups of people, and there's obviously a lack of leadership. There's, no cohesiveness whatsoever to this group, and they're just chaotic. And it was cringy in a lot of ways, but I think that might have been the point also, was to show that what the rebellion was at this point was definitely not very organized.
No, not at all in this case. And these two groups, it's one group, but half of them end up turning on the others based over insults at this point. They can't agree what to
Right.
do. They don't have a leader. They don't have a chain of command in this case. And so someone takes offense and shoots somebody else. And then, half the group has Cassian's TIE Avenger. The other half has Cassian. So they can't get off the
Mhm.
planet unless they're going to work together. So after taking pot shots at each other for, 2 days, they finally agree they're going to settle this by the Star Wars version of rock, paper, scissors.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly
And
what I thought too.
yeah, and Cassian just has enough of these dolts, and he takes advantage of the fact that it's his crashed ship, the one that him and Porcos had. He knows where all the guns and stuff are hidden, so he gets that stuff and gets the drop on them and gets away on this. And you know, on the one hand, I feel kind of bad for these rebels because they're in over their head, but at the same time, it's like, how did cooler heads not prevail in this? I
Mhm.
mean, they're all on the same side. How was it that there wasn't like a smart one among them?
Right. Exactly. I know. It was a little cringy in that way, but again, I know it served that greater purpose of just showing how there's all these just these a bunches of angry people
Yeah.
essentially, and they just don't really have any kind of direction.
Right. All right. So we're gonna put Cassian aside here because the end of his story coincides with what happens with Bix, Brasso, and Wilmon. But we get a new planet, Minu-Rau, which we had speculated might have been Dantooine from what we got to see in the
Mhm.
trailers. But it's this agricultural planet. This is where they ended up after what happened on the Rix Road back on Ferrix with the Empire. And it picks up with Bix Calleen having a nightmare of Dr. Grost. That was the guy that tortured her
Mhm.
with the sounds of those younglings that they made while they were
Yes.
squealing, they're dying, and it kind of drove her mad. Brasso has got a relationship with a farmer that's there, and then Wilmon is developing a relationship with someone. And they are basically there acting as mechanics, as itinerant mechanics that go from silo to silo fixing things. Then the Empire shows up to conduct an audit. They put up a communications blackout. And the issue is, of course, Bix, Brass, and Wilmon don't have visas to work on this planet. So they're worried about being discovered, which eventually they do. And then a lot of other unfortunate things happen. You were talking about the adult theming here. The one
Mhm.
lieutenant, Kroll is his name, basically shows up and tries to rape Bix
Oh,
on
that was
this.
awful. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that was so hard to watch.
Yeah, that was brutal. I mean, like, you know, in The Force Awakens, we have the scene where Kylo invades Rey's mind, which is, an unwarranted, unwelcomed, intimate moment in that
Mhm.
regard. And that was uncomfortable. But this was another level of uncomfortable here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, and her fighting back And, just it was the level of violence in this and the way that Kroll ends up ultimately dying was wow.
Well, and then, on top of that, he's got his driver sitting outside their, it's their ship that got turned into their home. And the
Uh-huh.
driver's like, he knows what's going on in there, but he's just kind of like, yeah, get over
Yep,
with,
yep,
whatever.
exactly.
And, and so that was, you're talking about cringe factors with the Maya-Pei brigade of the rebellion here. And that as well, when he's demanding that she come out after all the screaming and violence that he heard. And she's like, he tried to rape me. He's like, well, he's dead now. Well,
Mhm,
that doesn't make anything better on this
mhm,
case. And so
right.
Wilmon and Bix get the drop on him in that situation. But, just the other comment I make about this section here is it's a really interesting juxtaposition of there is this like serene, almost idyllic portrayal of this rural lifestyle on this planet. These farmers and their silos, and the silos were cool. The Star
Oh,
Wars version of
yes,
silo were pretty cool.
they were.
And then in the one moment, then the other hand, you have the Empire coming down, basically persecuting people. Looking for. I mean, it's like, what does it matter if there's people that don't have visas on this planet, unless you're actually looking for a known criminal? In this case, the people on the planet aren't complaining about them there doing the work that needs to be done. So just the tactics that the Empire employed they show up at the one shop. I think the character's name was Kellen that he owns. And then, they like, make sure everyone gets fed. No compensation is being offered,
Mhm.
for feeding all these stormtroopers and stuff like that. They just kind of come in like we own the place. And because we're doing this audit, we're going to take and do whatever we want.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. And, I do have a question for you though.
Mhm.
How did they end up on Minu-Rau? I know that there was basically one almost throwaway line in the first season where they were talking about this nice little, farming planet or
Uh-huh.
whatever. But how did they end up like, did they have a context specifically there that took them in? Remind me, because I forget.
We didn't see them get there in season
Okay.
one.
Well, I
So
know we didn't see them get there, it
yeah.
was just kind of hinted. So, it was a very interesting choice for them to end up on this particular planet. So, was their main reason for being there just to hide out and blend in, or was it to actually try to get more rebellion faces, to the cause kind of thing?
Well, we can only surmise that, from what we saw on here, Andor is the only one that's actively engaged with the rebellion at this point.
Mhm.
And when he sent them on their way, to me, it was we got to get you all relocated because you can't stay here. The Empire knows who you all are, and you'll
Right,
be in
yeah.
danger here. And so, again, they're not actively involved with the rebellion here. So for them, this is someplace they could put their skills to use. And if they go to Coruscant, they're going to be handing over their chain codes every time they turn a corner. So
Mhm.
this is someplace where, yeah, they can be a bit more anonymous. But that's my take on it anyway.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And, it was really nice the way that they were taken in by the whole, community
Yeah.
while they were there until it all went sour, of course. And obviously they were waiting for Cassian to come back. They knew he was going to be coming back for them eventually. And poor little BMO, oh, I
Yeah.
felt so bad for him. He just Cassian back, is he coming? But then the
He is
way
a
that he was
droid puppy.
playing, he
Yeah.
really is. And the way he was playing with the kids and he was even
Uh-huh.
interacting with their pretend play. I
Yep.
was just like, "Oh, BMO, you're just so sweet."
Yeah. Yeah. He was the little lost puppy that was waiting for his master to come back.
Yeah.
And, Cassian, as he kept
Yeah.
saying there. And then he was not happy at the end that he was
Mm-mm.
going to be left behind because they couldn't take him and the charger and, on the speeders and stuff that they were going to leave on. And so, yeah, that was not a good moment for him.
Yeah,
But
Brasso was trying to, convince him to or was it Tayla or Tyla or whatever? "She'll take good care
yeah.
of you, don't worry, and she'll make sure you get your rest when you need it."
Mhm. Normally, when we do our reviews of live action shows, I've had an opportunity to watch these things like twice before we discuss it. But given that, again, they dropped 3 and it was over 2.5
Right.
hours with footage, I only got to watch it the one time and then just kind of put together my notes from some of the episode guide type stuff on here. When the Empire shows up and Brasso gets discovered near Kellen's store, and a stormtrooper gets the drop on him and he brings him over, and Brasso accuses Kellen of having betrayed them, that turned him in. I got the feeling that was more for Kellen's benefit than it was Brasso actually being angry at them. That the idea was Brasso knew the gig was up where he was concerned, so he was going to try and spare Kellen any
Yes.
trouble he might get into.
I felt
Okay.
that way too. Yes.
Okay.
Because it
I
was
haven't
a
had
little over the top.
Mhm. Mhm. And you kind of saw a little bit of like confusion on Kellen's face at the
Yeah.
start of that. But then there's that look. They kind of focus in on both their faces at one point, and Kellen doesn't do anything like ultra overt, but it kind of looks like you can see the gratitude on his face. Just kind of like there's a
Yes.
subtle nod that he gives him,
Mhm.
like he recognizes what he's doing there.
Right, right, because they did take, Kellen and the families and things, they did take them in,
Mhm.
and Brasso is definitely not one to be that over the top about things, typically.
Right. And so we're in the end of episode 3 here, and we've got like a couple of storylines to get through. But this is where Cassian comes back to them because he got lost in space after he got away from
Literally.
Yavin IV. And I love it. He finally gets through to Kayla at Luthen Rail's shop. And, he's talking to her about how they're using the code phrase. He's like, I've been hanging upside down.
For 2 days.
Diego is so good when he does that angry thing when he talks to
He
people.
does.
He just, I've been hanging upside down. He's just so frustrated with all this point. He's like, this is not the ship that I trained to fly on. And so,
Right?
which was great at the
So
beginning of the first one.
good.
He gets to that cockpit and he looks so confused because one, there's no chair. The back on the chair is missing. And
And
then it's not
everything's backwards.
right. And so he finally like turns it on and the chair comes up out of the floor so he can sit down and fly the ship. And then he tries to get the controls and it flies right back into the wall. So he had a rough beginning there. But that's when he's informed by Kayla of the communications blackout that's around Minu-Rau. And Cassian immediately knows that Brasso, Bix, and Wilmon are all going to be in trouble. And so he heads
Mhm.
straight there. And by this time, he's actually figured out how to fly this Avenger and just wreaks havoc on the Empire there. Blows up the one transport carrying the officers and the and the stormtroopers, shoots the silo so it empties its grain
That
all
was
over
so
those
cool.
those other stormtroopers. But unfortunately, he got there a second too late, and one of the stormtroopers, I I took it to be that he shot Brasso's speeder, which caused it to crash, and that's how Brasso died, more than I think Brasso
Mhm.
got shot himself. I was not
Mhm.
expecting Brasso to be done this early in the season.
No, I wasn't either. I know that made me really sad when Cassian
Yeah.
went over to him. I thought maybe he was just knocked out and he was gonna wake up, but unfortunately, that was not the case. But
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that they talked about at Star Wars Celebration Japan is that there's this kind of opportunity for a developing romance between Cassian and Bix. And we see a little bit of that throughout these 3 episodes where, when that one Imperial lieutenant shows up and he's trying to encourage her to like, I can't remember, go somewhere and see something. And her response is, well, I don't think my husband would approve.
Yes.
And it was kind of an excuse for her to say, not be rude and say, I'm not interested and create trouble for herself. But it seems like there's a bit more to it than that. That's kind of how she was thinking of Cassian.
Mhm. Exactly. And I have to say too, did you catch that they had a picture of Marva
Yeah.
right next to where they would try to communicate? I thought that was a nice touch.
Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah. And of course they had to leave all that stuff behind as they left.
Yeah, they
So
did. That might be the only remaining picture of Marva too. I mean, other than maybe what's left on Ferrex, but
yeah, they'll have to
kinda
covertly go
sad.
back to get a new wallet picture. So
Yeah.
okay. Well, there's probably more to be said about this, but we still have several things, other things to talk about
Yes,
here.
we do.
Yeah, let's go to director Krennic real quick, and then we'll finish up with Mon Mothma last because that was a huge portion of this and very moving. But
Yes.
he's having this. Okay, first off, I didn't expect to get him like right off the bat in this series,
Right. Yeah, same.
and there he is conducting a meeting at the Malthine Divide. For a minute there, I was like, "Wait a minute, is this the same place that the Bad Batch like infiltrated that meeting between Krennic and um what was the evil doctor's name, Hemlock, and Tarkin?" But it's
Mm,
not. They were on Iriadu. But I was like, it looks very
it
similar.
is similar, yeah.
Yeah. But so he's conducting this meeting and he tells everyone, if you're here and you don't see your colleagues or your supervisors, they don't know, they don't need to know, you aren't going to tell them what's going on. And he makes this presentation on Ghorman. I was kind of taken back by the like Department of Tourism for Ghorman video that they watched, talking about
Yeah.
the textiles that they make from the silk from the worms that are there. And this goes on for a few minutes before he cuts it off. We just covered the Mace Windu Glass Abyss novel, and I was thinking about, I was like, are these worms related? Are these spider worms related to those spiders, or what's the situation? It was a little weird to me that we had two stories with this same type of element this close together. What do you think?
Yeah, it is a little ironic for sure. I do definitely think they're different species, but
Uh-huh.
what I thought that was really intriguing about this particular, as you said, like propaganda video almost, like advertisement for come to Gorman. We have amazing linens and all of the things and just the showing the spiders and everything. But obviously that is sort of the secondary industry to what they were really after, which is this calcite ore. And so that was I was like, "Okay, this is what they're really going after. They don't really care about the linens. They're going for this ore."
Oh yeah, yeah. The Gormans, I think, love care about the linens. I think that's their thing, but
Right.
and don't care about this these calcite crystals that
Yeah.
they need
It
for
just
the
happens to be there.
yeah. And I was like, did you only record this off the Star Wars Travel Channel or what? When you're watching that video, but
But
um,
you know what? It was so this is one of the things that brought me back to being to thinking like, "Okay, this is, yeah, so 1970s."
mhm,
Which, would be right around the time that obviously A New Hope was eventually released. So I liked that little throwback to that nostalgic kind of feeling of that era.
right. So basically, Krennic wants this calcite crystal for their fractal lenses. The problem is it's going to require like deep strip mining of this planet that runs the risk of causing the entire planet to just collapse because they have to go that deep to get what they need and how much they need of it. And I mean, this just tells you the how morally bankrupt Krennic is. All he
Mhm.
cares about is completing the Death Star and the glory that's going to get him. There's a
Yep.
few things that were notably. One, he's talking about the conversations he's had with the Emperor. Did he
Mm,
really have these conversations with the Emperor, or is he lying about that to impress everybody else? Because we see in Rogue One how he's so desperate to get the Emperor's approval.
right.
And
Yeah, I
it's
think he's just speaking over his, like to try to boost his ego to everyone else.
mhm.
I think you're right.
And then he's brought in these two propagandists specialists. They're like talking about all these stories they planted because they've got to sell a story. They got to come up with a reason that they take over this planet and displace the 800,000 inhabitants so that they can do what they want. And so these propagandists are going on about all these stories they planted. I didn't even follow all that. But after that kind of wraps up, you've got everyone that's at that meeting kind of broken off into little groups chatting, and Krennic comes over to Deidre Miro and wants to get her input. And this was kind of cool because we've seen in the Catalyst, which was the Rogue One prequel novel, and in the Rogue One novelization, how desperate Krennic was to get into that inner circle of the Empire, how desperate he was to get approval from the Emperor and Vader and the likes like that.
Mhm.
But he sees in Deidre something that he wants, someone who's capable of doing something, and she's a bit of an outsider. And so he's kind of like identified this kindred spirit, and he's doing for her what everyone else isn't going to do for everybody else, which is weird because you don't think of Krennic being altruistic like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was so much altruism as it was that he saw some sort of vulnerability in her and wanted to exploit it because
Yeah.
he could see how smart she is. And so I think it was, definitely a means to an end for him more so than
Yeah. Well,
anything
like, what is
else.
it he says to her? Something like it's like, drop the, and I'm paraphrasing here, the facade. It's like, you have an idea, just come out and say it. Cause she's like trying to be
She was kind of
coy with,
dancing. Yeah.
yeah, with like, expressing her opinion on the whole thing. And, and he tells her, I brought you here for a reason. And I mean, you want to talk about her level of brutality on this. She says, propaganda is one thing, but only gets you so far. What you need is an insurgency that you can count on to do the wrong thing, which is to, act up and give you a reason to retaliate against them is what
Yeah.
it's a thing.
Mhm.
And that's exactly the type of thing Krennic wanted to hear, which is, how do we get these people out of the way? He does not care about them at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so we know the Ghorman massacre is coming this
Right.
season, and now we know why. It's going to be this manufactured event. Basically, the ends justify the means on all this.
And I wonder how Dedra is going to end up feeling about that because, as we see her going to walk into that building with the other agent, I can't think of his name, but she stops and
Hard to
she says,
guess.
Thank you. Before we go in, I have to say, I don't want to do this. I was up all night thinking about this and I don't want to do this. And he ends
Yep.
up talking her into it, but you can tell that she's feeling like something's not right here, like something's out of place.
Well, and does she have a bit of a conscience left after what happened in Ferrix?
Mhm.
That was such a
Yeah.
traumatizing event for her that,
Right. Right.
that's she's seen what these type of insurgencies can lead to and what can be the results. And
Exactly.
that's on a small scale. And now we're talking about 800,000 people
Right.
there in Gorman. So
Yeah.
I could see why she would
Yeah.
have reservations about this, but she doesn't get off the hook on this one.
Nope, she
So
sure doesn't.
anything else you want to say about Krennic before we turn to Deidre and Cyril?
No, no, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I'm giggling because of where this is going.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to see more of Krennic this
For
season. That
sure.
was such a great introduction.
Yes.
And I mean, they A plus. They did a great job with him. Okay. I missed a chunk of the Andor panel at Celebration. So I did not really get coming into this that those two were going to have a domestic relationship in this season of
Mhm.
Andor. But
Mhm.
yeah, they have an apartment together,
Yeah.
and she's back when Cyril didn't expect her to be. And so he's talking about possibly putting off some sort of a meeting, but she's like, no, we need to get this over with. And it's about Cyril's mom coming to
Yes.
visit and meeting Deidre for the first time. This was priceless when it
So
came
good.
down to it. But what do you think about all this overall?
Oh, yeah, and at the panel, I was surprised too. I mean, they definitely came right out and talked about how these 2 were a couple, and they kind
Mhm.
of exploited that a little bit, on the celebration stage, live stage and everything. But it was still a little bit jarring. I'm not gonna lie, to see this, as you said, domestication of the 2 of them living together on Coruscant. And then to have Cyril's mom come in there and of course be her, passive aggressive self and
Mhm.
just putting Cyril right back into that whole vicious cycle of feeling like he's nothing and being judged. And even he goes in at one point and literally face plants on the bed.
Yeah.
But while he's out of the room, Dedra taking over and basically telling his mom what for. Like, this is the plan. This is not so much a plan, but this is how it's going to be. And this is how this is going to happen. And I'll make sure that he calls you and I'll make sure of this. I mean, oh my gosh. And then the whole Uncle Harlow thing,
Mhm.
when she said, I looked up his ISB records and I definitely wouldn't call his criminal past something to be proud of, and
Right.
put her right in her place. And Cyril's even like, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah, it was impressive. It was I mean, I loved it, like,
Priceless.
before Edie shows up, she's in there, like, trying to pick out her Deidre's in her room trying to, like, pick out her outfit, and she's, like, holding the one blouse up to herself, and she puts on that smile.
Yes.
And it's like, we haven't seen Deidre smile like that ever
Right,
in this
right.
type of thing. And so you could tell she was not looking forward to this. But when push came to shove, the way you characterized it was right on. Because Edie says, like, well, this is after Deidre talks about how her parents were essentially criminals and she got abandoned / orphaned as a child, and she grew up. And what do they call it? That kinder block or something like
The
that.
kinder block, yeah.
Yeah.
And she was
And
orphaned, yeah.
right. So that's kind of how she got toughened up on this. And then Edie makes that comment, it's like, well, Cyril is weak, whatever, but you'll train him up well. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. This is how it's going to go. And just put her in her place. And you said it just right. Cyril comes back from that little, I don't know, I don't want to call it nervous breakdown, but he
It was
just
close.
little panic attack, anxiety that hit him there. And he's like, oh, what did I miss? But
Exactly.
it was, it was very gratifying for as those of us in the audience getting to see Edie, get her comeuppance in that, because, it was so cringy in season 1 of all this.
Mhm, mhm.
All that
Well, I
being
have to
said,
s
oh,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
No, go you
I was
first. Go ahead.
just gonna say, yeah, I mean, I have to go back to a couple other things as far as their relationship in general. I mean, I think one of the reasons why they're together to begin with is just both of them have such an obsessive fervor for what they do. You know what
Uh-huh.
I mean? Like there's like this very calculated kind of professionalism, and then Cyril is very obsessive. I mean, when he's introducing that new kid
Yes.
into the job and he's like, "I was here where you were just a little while ago." And he's like, "And it started with this, and then I backtracked and I was able to find this." And he said, "There is an advancement here." And the kid's like, like gulping. So you could tell like Cyril is very dedicated to what he does,
Uh-huh.
obviously to almost like I said, that obsession. But I think that there's a mutual respect there between Dedra and he in terms of that kind of stuff
Yeah.
is concerned.
Well, you brought up the scene I was going to talk about as well, which is when he's
Oh,
on the
good.
job and he's talking about this promotion he got, and he's going on about how
Mhm.
it's like, there's discrepancy of 200 units, which does not seem like a big deal, but I worked on this for months and months, and then I found it, and then like suddenly everyone's talking about it, and then it's just like the kid was not impressed by this. It was, here he is, he's taking this job. It's a job on top of it,
Right, right.
and most people would just show up day after day and do that job. But Cyril found this discrepancy, so he got this promotion. But really, what he's been promoted to, this, I don't even mean any job, because a job is a job, but you would think he is like the grand auditor of the empire, the way he talks about it on this. He was a police officer. That's one of the things he argued with Edie about. She's putting down the job when he was playing cop on Ordo. And she's like, I was not playing, I investigated this, that, and the other. And he stood up for himself a little bit there before he got up and left. But it was the mid-level manager that doesn't really have any power is what the position he's in right now. But
Mhm.
he was talking the talk with this kid on this. And,
Yes.
you know, if I'm that position is like, oh my God, is this my life?
Right.
This is at the end of, this is the light at the end of the tunnel is that it? So, um,
Yeah, he's
yeah,
either gonna be depressed by that or inspired by that because
yeah.
Cyril is obviously very passionate.
And, part of me, it's like, I don't mean condescending, but it's just like, wow, Deidre and Cyril. I mean,
Who knew?
other than Deidre standing up for him, there was like no real affection displayed between those two. It was almost
No.
kind of like, we're doing this because what else are we going to do? Is the way
Yeah,
it seemed to
no
me.
chemistry
Yeah.
whatsoever.
All right. All
Agreed.
right. Well, let's get to Mon Mothma here. This is the last portion of it. And what we've got is, we're 1 year later. The relationship that her daughter Lita has struck up with Davos Skulden's son has blossomed, and now those two are getting married. And Mon is one part like gracious, excited hostess, one part like nervous wreck because this is not a situation that she approves of. This is a
Right.
tradition on Chandrilla that she grew up in, and she got married as a teenager. Now her daughter's about to go through it, and she thinks that her daughter deserves better on this. She's got issues with Perrin, her husband. She's got issues with her daughter. And then Luthen Rael shows up in the middle of all this, and
Mhm.
Mon doesn't like Davo Skolden at all in this. And then her friend Tay Kolma shows up and is in a bad way and puts Mon in a very delicate position. So a lot
Right.
going on here. What did you think about Mon's plight in these 3 episodes?
Oh, she's got so much going on, but I'll tell you one thing is awesome is her wardrobe.
Yeah.
So beautiful. I just have to give it up just real quick to the costume designers, and it just beautiful, beautiful array of just colors and metallics and everything. Because I mean, we're always used to seeing Mon in like white,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
basically white. But I mean,
Did you
Mon is
watch
obviously go
did you
ahead.
watch the featurette that's on StarWars.com? That's an 11-minute they're on their episode guide for this?
No.
Because the last couple of minutes has the costume designer talking about how he came up
Ooh.
with these costumes. And I thought of you when I saw that
Oh
because,
gosh.
you're into cosplay. You definitely need to go back and watch that.
I definitely will, definitely
Yeah.
will. But for Mon, I just felt her plight. She's obviously in a lot of pain, she's under a lot of stress, she's getting it from all sides. I mean, she's
Uh-huh.
got the pressure of the rebellion, she's got the pressure of her family, like you said, she's going through it with just seeing what Lita's going to be going through, and, she wishes that her mom would have cared for her the way that she cares for Lita, and all Lita could say was, "I wish you were drunk," which eventually, of
Yeah.
course, she does get drunk. But I think it's just keep herself from screaming, I mean, what the heck else does she do? And Lita is so young. I mean, I remember like going back and looking at season 1 and she was only 13. So this means she's 14 years old when
Yeah.
she's being betrothed to yeah, to wow. That
Getting
just blows
married. I
my mind.
mean, it's
Yeah,
it
right.
was that was the thing because like at the end of season 1, Davos says he wants an introduction. He's not looking for betrothal at that point. He's just looking for an introduction for his son because it's 2 kids from influential families that are attractive. She's coming of age. So I kind of have the feeling she might be on the age of being 14. So if we're being generous, she might be as old as 15 in this
Right.
episode and getting
Yeah.
married. And that was one of I'm glad you brought that up. That was one of the things that just got me here is that looking at her, Alita and her friends, who might as well have been like the Stepford teenagers of Trandrilla because they all looked and dressed the exact same way and were
Mhm.
reacting to the situation the exact. It's like they were in love with the idea of all this stuff without really even understanding what it was on
Yes.
this. Way
Yes.
too young to get married and get involved in that. And Mon Mothma was in that position herself, like you said.
Right, yeah, I mean, they were so enamored with her dress, they had it just elevated there, and the girls were like, "Oh, so wonderful." But then Lita was so upset about, "He won't even hold my hand," it just puts into
Yeah.
perspective how incredibly immature, they are, and Mon saw that in the fact that that just created that significant emotional distance and resentment between she and Perrin eventually, because they were obviously just 2 different people. But I will say I really was intrigued and interested in all of the, like, wedding traditions, the
Mhm.
cultural symbolism. I noticed that one of Lita's braids was cut when she entered into the wedding, which
Mhm.
obviously meant that she was engaged, and then I can't remember her newly, husband, but he got to cut the other one with the knife, and I just thought that that was really cool, and the way that they were dressed and the significance of the things like the ropes and the chains and, all of those things. It was very, very culturally layered, and I really appreciated that part of it.
Yeah, they did a good job with all of that.
Yeah.
The other thing that's happening here is that we have these scenes with what's going on in Chandrilla and Mon Mothma and Perrin's estate and all their wealth and all the opulence that's been accumulated over generations and people of power, people of intelligence. And then this alternates with everything that's going on in Yavin 4 with these
Mhm.
down on the look stranded rebels here.
No
And so
food, no water, right.
right. And they've got it in abundance on Trangilla to getting ready to celebrate this wedding. So you've got, and that's the thing. It's like Mon Mothma is the leader of the rebellion at the time we get to A New Hope and everything that comes after. And she cares for all of her people and stuff like that. But it's kind of it's shocking almost. It's like the rebellion's not fully formed. And she doesn't even know all the different cells that are out there. Luthen probably does. He's the one that knows where everybody is and what's going on. Mon Mothma is still kind of in the dark. But yeah, this juxtaposition of what these two different groups of rebels and there was very, very stark. And to follow up on some of the things you said, at one point, they're setting up for, this wedding is like a 3-day event. There's the first night festivities, and then the second day they're go hiking up the side of the mountain, and they're going to get a blessing from the elder and be purified in time for the wedding. And then there's the wedding itself, and then the reception that comes afterwards. And parents like, oh, your lover did, and she's like, who am I supposed to be taking as a lover now? It's like, and of course, parents referring to Tay Kolma, who's the one that arranged everything with Davos Skulden in season 1 to cover up the deficiency in her bank account that the Empire was on the verge of discovering. And, it seems like they just get past these things and they fall right back into them here.
Yeah.
And Perrin's not likable at all.
He really isn't.
Except for like that one speech he gave where he's talking about, this is what we were talking about at the beginning when I said Sagrona and you responded with the Sagrona Teema thing there. It's this Chandrillan toast that he's doing. And he's talking about, the responsibilities of the father of the bride and, welcome everybody there and thanking them for being there. But he has to impart this one like insight. And he says to his daughter Lita and her fiance Stecken, it's inevitable that pain is going to find you, that there are going to be bad times, but you need to look past that and reach for the joy. And which was very profound. And that's exactly what happens at the end of this episode because Tay Kolma is kind of passively threatening Mon Mothma on all this, on what's happened. He points out that your financial difficulty's been taken care of. Davos Skulden's got what he wanted, and he's had some financial difficulties. And Mon Mothma's trying to be consoling as a friend and says that, I'm sorry to hear that, and she's about to kind of object to things that others have done to it. But he points out it's the rebellion that's harmed me the most. And it's like the realization of what that meant hits Mon like a ton of bricks in that moment. And so it's kind of like, yeah, he did her a favor, but now he's threatening to betray her there. And I was really disappointed in Tay in that moment.
I know, I was too, because I thought he was, pretty loyal, and he was for the most part, a stand-up guy, especially in his dealings with Mon. But yeah,
he was desperate. I mean, I can't remember what the name of the actor is, but he played that so well. The desperation he had. Perrin points out that he drank too much. He had too much to drink on that first night, so they had to give him a ride home.
Yeah.
And so he comes back and he kind of runs into Mon again, and you could tell he was too drunk and he swayed into her and all this. And despite all of that, Mon Mothma realizes that there's threat out here, and her plan is to meet with Tay on Coruscant in a week and come up with a number to help him out. But Luthen doesn't see it that way. It's kind of like we pay him now, we're paying him forever. He's a loose end. And it's never explicitly stated, but Luthen is going to get rid of Tay on that.
Right. And that's the whole reason why, was it Cinta ends up being his driver instead. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Vel was not happy about that.
Right. Because Vel hasn't seen Cinta in, I think, since the end of season 1. A year has gone by. And it's because their duties have taken them apart. Luthen's there, which has already put Mon on edge. And then Vel shows up and she's on edge because Luthen's around. And then Kayla, Luthen's assistant, is there, which doesn't make things any better. And of course, there's all of this rebel business that's being done on Trandrilla, which puts more pressure on Mothma because she's there to conduct the wedding, not to host rebel activities. In
Right.
this instance, she's trying to keep her world separate here. She's trying to take care of her daughter's wedding. And then, Tay shows up and Luthen happens to be around and he's going to take care of it. And there's that exchange they have where Luthen says, you need to be protected. And Mon says, I'm not sure what you're saying. And then there's just this look that goes over Luthen's face and he says, how nice for you.
Yes.
I give Stellan Skarsgård the Emmy.
Oh, he's so good.
He's so brilliant in this role.
He really is. And he flips a switch. I mean, so seamlessly between, the Luthen Rael that is the, dealer of all of these antiquities and artifacts, and then the rebel leader, essentially.
Yeah. And this goes back to that awesome speech he gave in season 1 when he's meeting with the ISB spy. And the spy protests about, because he's just had a daughter and, he's having to sacrifice things and Luthen won't let him go. And the spy says, well, what is it you sacrificed? And he's talking about, decency, kindness. I seek counsel in dead men. I fight for a sunrise that I'm never going to see. What have I sacrificed? Everything. I paraphrased it, but yeah, I just saw that scene the other night and it struck me like thunder again. And, and this is what we're talking about. And that's what's hitting Mon Mothma. Is that, and to achieve what she wants, there's sacrifices that she's going to have to make, use the tools of her enemy, and sell a bit of her soul to do it.
Yeah.
In this case.
Right. Well, part of that sacrifice is even just allowing Lita to marry into, the Skulden family.
Yeah.
And then now she's got her childhood friend, in Tay that she's going to have to see basically be taken out of the picture.
Even we're using the euphemisms at this point. He's going to get murdered by Cinta. That's about what's
going to get
here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Elimination is definitely on the horizon for him.
Yeah. And so then that disco droid comes out for the reception here.
So cool.
Yeah. And we get another version of Niamos, which was a song they used 3 different times in season 1. I came to discover today. And she's doing what Perrin said, pain found her. She's reaching for the joy. She's attempting to numb the pain by drinking and going crazy on the dance floor there. This was so good. This season's off to a great start. Andor continues to be one of the greatest things that Star Wars has done in years.
Oh, it's so true. So true. Can't wait for next week.
I think we've hit everything. But is there anything else you want to talk about in this longer than usual episode of Podcast Stardust?
No, other than, was that a blurg that ran through the camp on Yavin IV when they were with the rebels? That horned thing. Remind me
if it was like a blurg variant of some sort,
or a reek. Could have been a reek too. It had horns, but anyway.
I did like the creature that was on Minu-Rau that kind of looked like the space cow that was there when they were doing the feast.
Big old Texas Longhorn. Yep.
Minu-Rau. Okay.
That's fun.
All right. Well then, we'll have plenty more Andor discussion to come up over the next few weeks as we continue to get 3 episodes at a time. And we were dealing with a bit more time constraints, so I'm hoping to get an opportunity to dive in a bit deeper with the notes ahead of our future discussions. But this was a good discussion. I'm glad we got to have it, Jay.
Me too.
Okay. Well, then that just leaves us to say thank you all for joining us for the episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussions of episodes 1 through 3 of season 2 of Andor. If you've enjoyed the discussion and you want to catch what we have to say about the rest of these episodes this season, then subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. And once you've done that, we'd greatly appreciate your ratings and reviews on whatever podcatcher it is that you use. And if you want to hear what we have to say about shows like The Mandalorian and season 1 of Andor, head over to retrozapp.com and you can find those shows in our archive. We have everything over there beyond what you're going to find on your podcatcher. Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are one more time and where else we can be found online?
Sure. We are really easy to find. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we also maintain some Pinterest boards, and we always have our YouTube channels. So we have our traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And we'd love it if you would hit us up on those for some subscriptions, as well as let us know, what your thoughts were about season 2, episodes 1 through 3 of Andor, as well as anything else that we cover, which is a lot. So check that out. And once again, share that out with your friends. And we do have a TeePublic store. So if you are in need of some new threads for yourself, they're not made by Ghorman silkworms and spiders, but we do our best. The link to that is in our show notes, and there are 7 different show logo designs available. And if you do pick up something, it does help to support our little rebellion.
All right. You want to remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Sure. So you can always find me on my Instagram, which is j.snipscosplay. And you can see me as Ahsoka, the fourth sister, 2 different versions of Hera, my original concept Mandalorian, as well as many, many other things. And I do have a couple of appearances coming up in May. So if you head up my stories and feed, you can find out exactly where and when.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we'll be getting into part 2 of our Star Wars Celebration Japan news catch up. And then on Friday, we'll be talking more Andor as we get into season 2, episodes 4 through 6. And then once we've caught up on Andor and the Celebration news, we'll be back to our normal schedule, which will be news, episode reviews, and some other type of discussion every week. So just a lot to get through in May.
Mm-hmm.
So we got Tales of the Underworld and Light Magic and all kinds of stuff. So make sure you hang around for all that. But with that, thanks for listening to episode 879 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.